So I did this presentation. I remember I told them, I'm sorry, I can't actually do this. I cannot program this and fix your problem. And they were like, what are you talking about? They said like, okay, well, don't worry, we'll get somebody else and move on. I said, I don't think you really get what I'm saying. The reason that I can't fix it is you're not managing your business right. There is no computer solution to this. You need to fix the way you run your business, and then we can actually automate it and make it work. I remember like this, almost like a direct quote. The guy said to me, what are you talking about? That's impossible. We've been doing it like this for 30 years. And I said, yeah, I know. It blows my mind too.
Welcome to the Calgary Sessions. This is episode number 148. I'm your host, Jeff Humphreys. Before I get into it, if you like this one, please share it. I'm trying to get some more exposure on the show. Today's guest, I get invited to this boardroom a couple of years ago with my good friend, Michael Ray Pablo. And he's like, yeah, come, we're going to go talk about this new project. And I want you to meet the CEO. I was like, oh, all right. That's how this all started. So name and who you are, please.
Sure. Well, Mark Little, and born and raised in Calgary, and so I'm excited to be on the show here with you, Jeff. Thanks.
This will be the fun thing about meeting you for the first time a couple of years ago was like just the banter. We talked about podcasting and like boating. And that was like
water skiing.
Yes. It was just like when you walk into some situations, you're like, we're going to go talk about this business and marketing or whatever. But the thing that actually clicks is like everything outside of that.
Yeah. Which
I always find super interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it is true. Like just when you connect with people and when you don't, right?
Yeah.
Both sides of that.
It
makes a difference.
Quickly, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, the gist of the show, I like guests to go back as far as they want to go. Like where they grew up, how they grew up, parents, siblings, jobs, and then we kind of went to school, and then we kind of weave our way to where you are today.
Oh, I see. Running
what you're running. So it's like this origin story, like this journey story.
Yeah.
And it gives people context for who, why you are and who you are. So
yeah, okay.
So wind this thing back as far as you want to go.
Sounds like a deal. Well, so I was born in Calgary, a long time ago. And it's funny because I think back to like Calgary was like 220,000 people when I was born.
Wow.
Gives you some idea how old I am. And the thing that was amazing is even when we had the Olympics in 1988, it was like 660,000 people. Mm-hmm. So I grew up in Westgate and one of the suburbs of Calgary here. Now it almost seems inner city compared to those days. But so I grew up in Westgate and went to Westgate Elementary and Vincent Massey and Ernest Manning.
The reason I'm laughing already is because I grew up in Strathcona and went to St. Mike's.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
okay.
So
okay.
So all these things you're talking about, I spend a lot of time in those areas.
Interesting. Yeah. In those same areas. Yeah. Maybe I delivered papers or something to your family and stuff. But anyway.
You went to Manning.
So I went to Manning, and then from there, I was trying to figure out how do I get an education and do it cheaply and stuff. So I went to U of C and started there. And
so it's Calgary. It's like
so everything's been Calgary for that whole period of my life, and went to University of Calgary. And I originally went to do business, and I thought, well, this would be great, and I'll do an art minor. And I ended up with a computer science degree and a business minor. And it's kind of a long story, but back when I was in university, I got a speeding ticket. It's kind of ironic. And I fought it. And I actually fought it in a lot of detail. I ended up pulling prints and records and all sorts of different things, and then wrote a computer program to prove that I could not have actually done what it was. And I got so enamored, the speeding ticket was actually in Wetaskiwin. And so I drove all the way up there to have my day in court. And had this big fight and stuff and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't realize, I wasn't thinking about the context at all. I was just thinking about the fact that, hey, I got a ticket and I'm fighting it and everything else. Well, you get up there and you find out, okay, this is like the entire court is just like, Frank who got drunk and this is his fourth time this week. And so he goes up and the prosecutor's kind of like, hey, Frank, you got to stop doing this. And the judge, hey, Frank, come on, we can't see you here next week and on and on. But the school shows up. And so then I actually show up, I'm in university, I'm taking physics and computer science and all sorts of things. And so I just had all sorts of stuff loaded for bear to fight my speeding ticket. And by the time I finished, the school was laughing at the prosecutor. That's probably not a good thing to do in a town. So anyway,
amazing.
But I had so much fun with it, and we laughed all the way back on our drive to Calgary that I got so enamored with computers. That was it.
Crazy.
So that's how I ended up with my computer science degree. And then I went to work in the industry. I started with Imperial.
Yep.
And went into telecommunications and all that kind of stuff. And through a series of events, I ended up getting into the business side. And when I first started in the industry in my career, I thought I would never leave Calgary. But shortly after, I started in 1985 in the industry.
Wow. And
by 93, we were on our way to Toronto. And at the time when we left in 93, we never thought we'd be back in Calgary, but we thought, hey, it's a big world. We'll go explore and all sorts of things. But then through a whole series of events, including Imperial moving their head office to Calgary, we came back to Calgary, and we've been kind of in and out of Calgary ever since. But we're super happy to come home.
Growing up in the Southwest, specifically in that neighborhood with like Edworthy Park just down the hill, and the river and all the things, what did your like childhood look like? Like what had you interested in, or where did your parents kind of push you into?
Well, I played sports,
Yep.
And I played sports like at the local rink outside and all that kind of stuff. And I'm the youngest of three, so and my eldest brother is 2 years older than me, and then the middle one's a year, and so we were kind of a year apart.
Yep.
So we were all in high school together and all in junior high together and all that kind of stuff. But I was the youngest, so I was the one that had to like get everybody in line and keep everybody straight and all that kind of stuff. But so I played hockey, but by the time I was about 15 or 16, my feet were so big I couldn't buy skates. Back then you couldn't buy custom skates like you do today. So anyway, so that was kind of the end of hockey for me, but I enjoyed sports, but I was never like super great at it.
Yep.
And I was in scouts. And when you said Edworthy Park, we used to walk over and have scouts in that church overlooking the ridge in Edworthy Park. We did that for years and stuff. So I did a whole bunch of outdoor camping and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And the one other thing is that I when I was about 14, I decided, hey, I wanted to make some money so that I could do some stuff and everything else. So I ended up working at Ponderosa Steakhouse in Westbrook Mall. That probably hasn't even been there in your lifetime, Jeff. It's
I remember it.
Yeah.
I'm born in 77, so it's like...
Okay.
So I remember.
So I worked at Ponderosa Steakhouse, and then I ended up working and helping with the Ponderosas all through there were 4 in the city.
Yep.
So I ended up working a bunch there. And then one of the senior leaders at Ponderosa went to open a chain called Chi-Chi's Restaurants.
No way.
So when I was in university, I went and became a waiter at Chi-Chi's Restaurant on McLeod Trail and stuff. And we had so much fun. It was fantastic.
When you
felt like you hosted a party every night at work. Right.
I was lined up.
Yeah. And then I ended up becoming a waiter trainer for Chi-Chi's. So I went to San Diego and opened the store there, and then I actually opened the store in Sunridge Mall.
Wild.
So yeah, it was fun.
Why'd you get a job so young? Was it like money? Was it just like did your older brothers have jobs and you were just like trying to?
Well, my brothers had done a little bit of work, but I think to some degree I was kind of bored, and it was kind of like, hey, it would be nice to make some money so I can go do my own thing. And so I started working basically as soon as I turned 14, and I started, I was a dish licker at Ponderosa Steakhouse, and then cooked on the line and opener closer and doing the cash and closing the stores and all that kind of stuff. So I learned a huge amount. In fact, I view a lot of my career success to the time that I learned between 14 and 21 in all these different roles, whether it was serving people at a restaurant or whether it was dealing with personnel issues at 16 with people at Ponderosa Steakhouse or whatever it is. So I loved it. I learned a lot. I realized, I'm good at it. And then I made quite a bit of money. So I remember when I first got my first professional job coming out of university, I actually had to take a pay cut to take my first professional job. And I was thinking, like, what's wrong with this picture here?
It's all backwards.
But I had to work a lot less too.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I was working almost 40 hours a week while I was going full time to university.
The restaurant world. So I worked in nightclubs for a long time, like a decade.
Okay.
Bussing, bartender, DJ.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the last job before I started my own, I worked for a restaurant group at 100 restaurants across North America.
Oh, wow.
5 different brands, 100 restaurants. So the restaurant world is like, it's very close to me.
Yeah.
It's interesting what you learn though, right? Like whether it's managing cash and the people side, like when you say those years were like really informative for you, it's I've had a couple of restaurateurs or people that have that background, and they all feel the same way. There's something about it. You learn a lot of lessons.
Well, I also think you learn about kind of the human condition and dealing with people, both in good times and bad. Now, generally, I always say, like, you know, people generally, if they're having a fight with their spouse, don't go like, hey, well, let's go out to the restaurant and have a fight there. Like, this would be fantastic. So generally, people come out to have a good time.
Yeah.
But it doesn't always go well. I can think of some pretty extreme situations that happened. And so you're dealing with people at their best and sometimes at their worst.
Yep.
And so I actually had a ton of fun. I love the business. And I was originally going to go to SAIT and take hotel and restaurant administration. And my dad talked me into doing business at University of Calgary. And it's kind of like, hey, when you finish, you want to go into the hospitality business, have at her. But by the time I was halfway through university, I thought, maybe I'd do something different.
Did you have ideas about being in the restaurant world or the bar world? Like, did you have ideas of either opening up your own thing or continuing to grow, like to go to a bigger chain or like whatever the bigger chain was?
Yeah, like when I went to university to go do business, I was hoping to go work in some massive hotel resort.
Yep.
Hopefully in some exotic place somewhere. And I thought this would be spectacular. But when I was in university, I was thinking, okay, wait a minute. Like you're working 100% of the time that everybody else is off.
Yep.
You know, the Christmas season and Easter and summer and everybody's out partying, and Friday and Saturday nights you're running around like your head's cut off. And I thought, maybe I could come up with something better.
Yep.
For me anyway.
Did junior high and like high school, did you have I guess you're working so early. Was there anything else that was like you're interested in? Like sports was kind of there, but like work was your thing. Was there anything else that was like pulling you down a path?
I played volleyball and basketball and all that sort of thing. I remember when I was at Ernest Manning, the coach kept going like, Mark, you got to come play basketball. And I was like, don't even
always
worry
been tall?
about it. Oh yeah. I've always
been like,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And, so I was like, I don't think so. And anyway, I eventually went out and I played very aggressively. So I ran over a couple of people in practice, and the coach was like, okay, well, listen, thanks for coming out. Like, we'll see you some other time. But volleyball in university or in high school was probably my big thing. So I played volleyball, and it's like you learn team sports, and I ended up reffing for a bunch of it and stuff as well. But hockey is probably my true love for a sport. I love the pace of the game and big Flames fan. I love it. And I ended up with a son-in-law who's an Oilers fan. Can you imagine? He didn't admit to it until after he had married my daughter. So obviously he was nervous about it.
Coming out of high school, did you had the restaurant thing in your head. Was the dad conversation like a big swing moment? Like to actually not, to go?
I don't know, a big swing moment. Like for me, it was more of it made sense that I keep my options open. So I thought, oh yeah, okay, that kind of makes sense. I'll go get a business degree and then I'll go into hotel and restaurant administration. I think I spent, so many years in university as well as high school and stuff in the hotel and hospitality business. I felt like I had a lot of context. So the hospitality side of the education was less useful to me. It was more about the business side. But I loved business and the opportunities to engage and all that kind of stuff. So, it ended up being that I loved working with people. So it really ended up being more of a natural evolution of my education and thinking that I decided to go into the industry. And I loved what I did. So anyway, so what happened is when I started in the industry, I went to Imperial Oil. I didn't think I would even be able to get hired because they were big on their co-op program at the time. Huge. And I had not done any co-ops.
Restaurants.
No, basically restaurants. The one place other place that I worked at during the summer and stuff was the IBM Product Center.
Okay.
So I used to do technical support. And then one year I was hired by Amoco to enter data into a database because I was a computer science student, and that kind of fell apart. But I ended up doing some like side development for Amoco through that period. So
like coding, like were you actually?
Yeah, like I was actually building these little systems. They built this system and spent 1.5 years building it, and then within a week we found out that the data didn't fit in the system. So I started building like simple little systems. I was in my second year of university in computer science. I built a simple little system just so we could start organizing the data.
Yeah.
But then you realize like people didn't understand their data. So then they had a high demand for, okay, well, help us get all this data organized, and people could input and track and report the data and stuff before they invested in these heavy duty computers and computer programs and all that kind of stuff. So I was working at Chi-Chi's waiting tables. I decided to leave Ponderosa after a year or two of university. I was developing these computer systems for Amoco on the side, and I was working at the IBM Product Center on weekends and all this kind of stuff. So it's kind of crazy. I actually view that my university was by triage. Well, my view was I wouldn't study for a midterm. If I pass the midterm, fantastic. Then I wouldn't study for the final. If I really blew the midterm, then I really had to buckle down and study for the final and hope it all worked out. So it worked out.
Did it like operating at that level? Did it just feel like controlled chaos all the time? And was there anybody else in your world that was like operating like that? Because it sounds like a lot going on at a young age.
Yeah, it was. My parents thought I was crazy.
But did it feel crazy, or did you feel like you had it?
It's funny. I loved it because like I'd go to work and wait tables, and I'm waiting tables and making some money, but I had fun engaging with all the people, and I thought, oh, this is fantastic. And then usually the Amoco work, like I would try and schedule it into a time where I was kind of down on school or, we had spring break or something. And then I would just like crank and see if I could pound out this stuff and get her all done and stuff. And I enjoyed the product center. IBM, I was learning about the technology. This was very applicable to what I was doing in school. And the technology was constantly changing at that time, right? This was the start of the personal computers. So the product center was all about delivering the personal computer direct to the consumer. So I learned and worked on technical issues and helped engage with customers. So I enjoyed working with the marketing folks, and like it was very personally engaging. So, to some degree, it was kind of like a lot of these things, like going to work and waiting tables, what to me was like going to a party. I got paid and, was able to support myself and have fun at the same time. So, it was better than it sounds. But I took a lot of risks with my education. There's no question. They wouldn't even let me in today with all the standards that they have. Like I'd never make it.
The going into computer science is an interesting. What was it about the tech that got you? Was it the coding idea, or was it like coming up with solutions for problem and tying it to technology? Like, what was the thing that led you down that path?
So back to this speeding ticket, the ability to actually put all this information together. And I remember that the person that gave me the speeding ticket said that they clocked me twice and used their tuning fork to test the radar in between. That was like a big mistake. So then I actually could run a program of like 1,000 different scenarios. It's like, well, how long did it take you to tune your fork? And so I wrote these computer programs basically to come up with every answer that was even possible in this discussion. So when the police officer was on the stand and you ask them like, okay, well, how long did it take to, do this? And they say, oh, it probably only took me 15 seconds. And you think, okay, well, wait a minute. But at this speed and that velocity, and you'd travel this distance, and this is more distance than I even traveled. And I have these witnesses, and I have, the layout for the city roads in Wetaskiwin and all sorts of stuff. So you just realize, like, I was just like, wow, this is incredible. The power of information and the capability to do, what a problem on a math exam or something like that, you can do it at like exponential time. It's incredible. So I just got so enamored more with the power of information and what you could do with the computer than the coding process itself or other aspects of it. So so I had a lot of fun with it, and I loved going in. Now, by the time I finished university and was starting my career, I was starting thinking like, okay, wait a minute, like, am I going to be sitting in a dark room with no other people coding? Like, I've got a problem, because, the thing I realized is I just loved working with people.
So you had this like, and that's what I was like wiggling towards, is like the cliche computer science person,
Yeah.
that, right? Dark room, coding, hammering, mad scientist. But then you have this restaurant side of you that's like all about people.
Yeah.
The two together are like an interesting mix.
Yeah. And I like the intellectual side of computers.
Yeah.
And because it was just so interesting and all the different things you could do with it, but the people side. And so when I ended up in my career, I literally worked in the systems development group for 9 months of my entire career, because I started in telecommunications. I had the opportunity to go into that, and I had studied a bunch of it in university and stuff. And it was a fascinating time, because it was just when the whole industry was deregulating. So we used to pay like ridiculous prices for long distance calls.
Ridiculous.
Yeah. In 1985, I remember it was 55 cents a minute for a weekday call during the day to phone from Calgary to Edmonton. 55 cents a minute. Crazy. It was $1.10 from Calgary to Toronto.
Wild.
Can you imagine?
No.
And so the whole concept was long distance is a luxury.
Yeah.
We are going to overcharge people for the luxury of phoning long distance and talking over distance.
Yep.
And we will subsidize the home phone. So the home phone was like a couple of dollars a month, and you could have a home phone. So everybody would have a home phone. Well, deregulation was like, no, these things have to live on their own and such. So long distance plummeted in its cost, and the cost of a phone went up significantly, $25 to $40 or whatever it was at the time. And so it was a massive change, but to have a window into the entire restructuring, because it was the politics of it, it was the commercial aspects of it, it was how industry responded, it was how the telcos were responding. It was like an MBA on steroids in my first 2 years in the industry. So it was absolutely fantastic.
Did you, in those 2 years when all this is happening, are you looking at it from that lens of like, all these people are involved? Like, could you see all the pieces that were at play, and were you being like very mindful of what's happening, or were you like how'd you process all that?
I think I saw most of it in that context. Like it really, but the big thing for me was we decided that as a company, our response to deregulation is we would set up our own network. Now, that didn't mean we were running wires. We still went and leased lines from the telcos and such. But then we would monitor our traffic and then figure out how many trunk lines did we need to drive down the average cost, so it was like 10% of what we used to pay and those sorts of things. So we're constantly analyzing all of the switches. And then I was involved in cutting over all the switches in Western Canada so that we could move on to our own network and stop paying these crazy prices. And so it was wild. It was a fantastic, like, I don't know if I could have had a better first job in the industry. And then because of that, I was dealing with the field. I remember going to Cold Lake operations, which, 20 years later or whatever it was, I would be running the operation. And, but I literally went there and met the site personnel and explained to them how the phone calling is going to change and why we were doing it and how everybody's going to make more money and all this kind of stuff. But I was driving around in the middle of the night trying to get from one to the next. And I didn't understand like risk and contingency and all that kind of stuff then. So I remember my first schedule, I cut over a site, Judy Creek, one night, and the next night I was doing Edmonton, and the next night I was doing Cold Lake, and when one goes off the rails and it takes 4 hours longer, I start realizing like, ooh, this was a bad plan. But thankfully I was young, you just power through it and get her done. So yeah.
As we'll get here, but as you're talking about all these experiences, it's like the foundation for the industry you got into, and like all the things, like it's just all the things you learn. It's just like so transferable.
Oh, it was fantastic. Yeah. And because you take that little assignment that I had, it's directly comparable to building an oil sands plant at like Fort Hills, $17 billion. It's kind of, now, it's a lot more complicated building a $17 billion oil sands plant, but you start realizing like, okay, risk, contingency, logistics, snow, weather, all of these types of things. I got burned on my first job, right? And I had the capacity to suck it up. The worst thing that ever came across in the implementation of that network was when the person that was supposed to actually code the PABX didn't show up because of some incident or sickness or what, I can't remember what it was. And I was like, oh my goodness, you got to be kidding me. Like, we never thought about it not cutting over. So we've already told everybody it is. We've already changed all the dialing plans. We've already done all this stuff. So because I had a computer science degree, I literally sat down with the people from the telco and coded their PABX. So, and we finished at like, 6 a.m. We were supposed to be done at 10 o'clock the previous night and hop in the car and drive to the next site and hope I get 2 hours sleep before we do it all over again.
And at that age, you're just like, this is how it works. Like,
well, I mean, isn't that the story of going to university and all this kind of stuff? As you do what it takes and you hope that you're awake for it. And but I remember it. So in hindsight, like, it was crazy that I planned it the way that I did. But we got it done very quickly. And so it made a lot of money. It was awesome.
So you were there for like 2 years ish.
Yeah.
And then what was why'd you leave? Like, what was the turning point to go?
Well, I'd finished this big project. And so I was still with Imperial, and they came along and said, hey, we have a great project for you. We want you. They were struggling with reserves management at the time. So, and reserves management is like, at the time, this is how companies traded, right? Their value around their reserves. So the integrity of that information was like super critical. But this was a huge turning point in my entire career. My entire future would be changed by this 9-month role. So I remember going into the exploration department and learning about how it worked. And there was a gentleman there that was, the steward of all the reserves and tracked everything and all the ledgers and all sorts of things. And they were like, we're having problems here and this is critical. So we've made a commitment that this is going to get done before the end of the year. So you're on the clock, you got 9 months, get it done. So I was there for about 2 or 3 weeks, and I have zero political context. I'm just there like to make a difference and think, okay. So I analyzed it all, and I went and did a presentation to the exploration management. And I was a little bit irreverent at the time, maybe. So I did this presentation. I remember drawing these I drew little caricatures of the leaders, and I was like, I told them, I'm sorry, I can't actually do this. I cannot program this and fix your problem. And they were like, what are you talking about? And they said like, okay, well, we thought, you were fairly smart. You'd figure this out and all that kind of stuff, but don't worry, we'll get somebody else and move on. I said, I don't think you really get what I'm saying. Computers basically just churn away on information. The reason that I can't fix it is you're not managing your business right. And so there is no computer solution to this. You need to fix the way you run your business, and then we can actually automate it and make it work. But all I can do is make your problem like 10x faster than you can make it today and create more chaos because this doesn't make any sense. And I remember like this almost like a direct quote. The guy said to me, "What are you talking about? That's impossible. We've been doing it like this for 30 years." And I said, "Yeah, I know. It blows my mind too." Like it's anyway, I was lucky to actually survive that little interaction, but they concluded after going through the details and stuff of that I was actually right, that they needed to change it. So they made the changes, we built the system, and it all worked out. And so that carried on. But that actually opened the door for me to now move into the business.
Right.
And so that was my first chance that I went from there into a business analyst job. And it was supposed to be a business engineering job, like an analyst engineer. But obviously I'm not an engineer, so that was a big furore. So all the professional ethics and stuff come up. So they changed the title to just be a business analyst so that I could engage in it. And I started doing that work and starting to understand, okay, what about the production side of the house and how do we think about production and resource and all that, which is instrumental to the industry, right?
Did you, like when you do that presentation, you could like see the business, like you could see the flaws. Did it just come like naturally? Was it pretty easy for you to see what was happening and just kind of connect a couple dots?
It's interesting because when you take computer science, it's all like, especially back then, I think it's a little higher level now in some areas, certainly not in machine language and all that kind of stuff, AI. But you learn to break things down into like their most basic elements. So you literally express every number, every letter of the alphabet and stuff in a series of ones and zeros, right? So this was all about logic. So you think, okay, well, how does that work? How's that work? How's that work? How's that work? And you break it all down. And so to me, it was just like, this doesn't logically make sense. And so I was basically just pointing out a logic problem.
Yeah.
It wasn't that I knew anything about resource, but I'm just saying, no, this doesn't add up, because if you did what you've done, I could literally triplicate all of this because it's not logically sound.
Yeah.
Like, and the issue at the time was they were tracking reserves by well bore. And you think, what? Reserves don't exist in well bores. They're accessed by well bores. They exist in reservoirs. So if you had two wells side by side and you attributed reserves, how do you actually make sure that you're not double counting the resource? It doesn't make sense. So it was just pointing out a logic bust.
Yeah.
And they, most of the people from a leadership perspective aren't actually in looking through the spreadsheets to do the math.
Yeah.
So this was a big revelation to everybody that they had this potential conflict because of the way that they were reporting and tracking all of this information. That was kind of the essence of the entire issue. So this was like the fact that I knew nothing was probably a huge advantage to me, because you just keep asking questions like, I don't know. Like, what do you mean you put that headset on your feet? Aren't your ears on your head? Like,
logic.
These are just basic questions, and this is what I learned. Like, I remember when I took my first class in university on logic. I was like, what? How do you teach logic? Like, logic is logic. I didn't realize they meant, oh no, this is hardware design. But I thought that was kind of funny that you could actually go to school and take a logic course. So.
Did you think that you either had or you didn't? Like, logic is like a.
Well, I just think like logic is. I thought like I was quite logical.
Yeah.
So I thought, this looks like a slam dunk. Sign up for it. Then you find out, we're supposed to be designing chips and computers. Like, who knew?
Next.
So,
once you got into the business piece, like the business analyst, did it click for you then? Like being on that side of the business?
Well, I think my computer science really helped me think about it, because I had a huge disadvantage everywhere I went because I had no context. Right. So I would go in and somebody would say, hey, we want you to like forecast this production or this throughput on a pipeline. You think, okay, fantastic. So what's the size of the line? Where did you get the information from? What's the data source? And you keep asking questions. You suddenly realize like, oh, wait a minute. The person training me couldn't tell me what some of this data was or the units it was. And then you just keep digging. And like, I can't tell you how many times I was in a job and found out that when you just keep going to ask and understand, like, okay, but where did this come from? And how did that come? And what report? And when does that report? And who makes the report? And how does it work? And you put all the pieces together and you realize like, okay, wait a minute. I often was asking questions outside of the person's knowledge that was training me.
Yeah.
And when you expanded that envelope, you started realizing like, okay, wait a minute. Like, what do you mean the data that we're putting in are estimates? They're not actually real numbers, but then we're actually going to use it to bill? Like, how does this ever get resolved? Like, so I actually felt like my computer science degree was a huge advantage. And also everything I learned in restaurants about engaging people is kind of like, it's too complicated for any one person to understand. So you needed to reach out and connect with people and understand what they did and how it fit. And so I learned a huge amount. So it just built a real ability and a desire to learn.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I would never survive in these jobs. And so I found that was very effective.
That's like this. It's such a unique skill set, like to have both those going, to ask the questions and be personable, to actually get people talking. I'm sure.
Well, I don't know. Sometimes it can create a lot of tension asking questions when people don't know. But we're all on a journey to learn, and we're all trying to figure out how to do the best job we can. So often when it was something new, that was a real forte for me, because I would connect with lots of people and try and figure out okay, what's going on here and how's it work and what's your contribution and all the various pieces associated with it. And it was less political if it's brand new, because nobody owns it and they're trying to protect the boundaries of it. But anyway, so I loved my career, and because I wasn't like a production engineer where I grew up all in production, or I was a explorationist or a geologist or whatever it was, I kept getting past, any weird thing that they needed resources for. They would go, we'll keep the production engineers, send little. And so I ended up getting amazing opportunity to see the entire industry. So I worked in everything from telecommunications. I worked in production planning. I worked in crude oil pricing and how pricing was done, futures trading, downstream planning, refinery operations,
Crazy.
Capital projects, oil sands development, oil sands operations offshore in the Gulf of Mexico, safety, environmental health and safety. So and every single time I made a change, it just re-energized me to learn more and more. And I actually, my advice to a lot of young people is, when you get put into a role, yes, learn the role. But you all of a sudden have access to all sorts of people that you may never literally work alongside again. And you have an opportunity to not just learn what you were sent in specifically to do, but the entire context. And when you do, you see different opportunities. And eventually all those bigger bubbles start intersecting with each other. So, when I was the CEO of Suncor, or in any of the senior roles that I was in, I actually felt like a lot of times I was facilitating the interaction of people that had, in a lot of cases, never met or never understood what they were doing. You start saying, wait a minute, you should get together, because they're actually working on the other side of the coin here. And if you can put those pieces together, that's when we see opportunities that are incredible. And that's how the future's going to be driven, right? Is not by just constantly repeating the past. We never move forward with that. It's by seeing new ideas and new perspectives. And we do that by creating collisions of people to see new things, right?
When you, when you talk to anybody about that idea of it's kind of like being open to the situation you're in, instead of just looking at your task of being very isolated. And the people around you and the opportunities, it's an interesting skill set to think like that, to actually look at it from a different lens. Is it teachable? Can you help people be more, is it being open-minded, or is it being more present, or what do you think it is that allows you to go there?
I think some of it is, I think it's teachable. That when I'm coaching folks, then, it's asking those questions to kind of force them out of their box. And so that they start thinking about it in a broader context. And I think that as you develop and exercise that muscle, you start thinking that way, right? And you start understanding. I was talking to somebody today, and they were talking about real estate in Singapore. And they instantly talked about, okay, but wait a minute, when China took over Hong Kong, then everybody's looking for a financial center. A lot of them go to Singapore. It drives up the values, which the real estate values, so it's driving up rent. And they kind of connected these political events to the broader economy and then the cost of living in Singapore. And I think, wow, that's an interesting thinking that you can see that the person's thinking broadly about not just, hey, I couldn't afford my rent, but the context. And then they made like major life changes to put themselves in a situation that they thought would last them for decades to come. And you think, wow, that's like bold moves.
Yeah.
Like I've never been in a situation where I felt like, okay, I had to move halfway around the world to create a very different situation for the future generation. And now, I mean, our city is full of people that have gone through that exact situation.
Yep.
So I've never gone through that personally, but these are the same types of things that you hope in people's careers, is that they develop not just the fact of what they're dealing with, but the broad context. And then especially if you get a broad experience, you will develop strength and knowledge to be able to get all sorts of people to work together on bigger and bigger things and find bigger opportunities.
As you're being like dropped into all these different jobs, was it did you know how you were being placed and why you were going to these specific, not issues, but like different things to figure out? Did you know that you had the skill set to kind of dig in and figure it out and bring people together and like move on?
Yeah, I think it was twofold. Like originally, I don't think it was that thoughtful. It was more like, hey, we got a problem. Like, let's see, can the person solve the problem or not? Sort of thing. But as time went on, I actually felt like, okay, there's much more of a strategy. I think like when you're from 20 to mid 30s, you kind of have to like own something and you have to show that you can fix it and make it happen and add value and be a team player and all those sorts of things. But I think at some point in there, and it depends on the organization and the leaders and all sorts of things. But at some point people go like, okay, wait a minute. That person's done good in a couple of things here. Maybe we should give them something to try a whole different dimension of their capability. So as I thought about later on in my career, developing senior leaders and such, you're looking in some cases for very different types of contexts. And I've literally had people go, ooh, please don't give me something that different. Because I'm very comfortable in my space, but I just don't want to invest the time or the fear of failure or whatever it may be. But people that are going to end up in big jobs dealing with politics and governments and markets and capital markets and all these types of things, they have to have a breadth of experience to be able to deal with it. And it doesn't matter if you're in tech or oil and gas or nuclear or whatever, right? Agriculture, it doesn't matter. The breadth of experience and making sure that you have all this stuff that's exercised is important to grow fantastic leaders.
When did it change? When did you start like bouncing around to all these different jobs? What was the pivot what was the next transition piece?
Well, it didn't really stop. Like like my family and I, we moved in 1993. Our girls were quite young. We moved to Toronto. We were in Toronto for 2 years. And we moved to Ancaster. And I worked at Nanacoke Refinery. So I was in head office in Toronto. I went to Nanacoke Refinery. I was there for 2.5 years. And then we went to New Orleans, Louisiana, to work in the offshore environment. And so that was intentional and to test me out in a different dimension in a foreign market offshore. Like this was very, very different. And I led the environmental health and safety organization there. And this is like super high risk stuff. Like, if something goes wrong, it's going in the ocean. And then it's like all bets are off once that happens. It's so this is high risk, whether it's helicopters or on big platforms and stuff. So, and hurricanes and all the stuff that go with it. So that was a very big transition. And then I came back to Canada into Cold Lake to run one of the sites, and then ultimately ended up running the operation for Imperial there. And then came back to lead the Curl Oil Sands project. And so I was 2 years at the site in Cold Lake. I was 2 years running the operation, and then I went into Curl to lead the Curl Oil Sands project on the development side. And I was there for about 4 years. Wow. And that's 4 years, I think, is the longest job I ever had.
Was that on purpose, or were you looking for other opportunities? As you know, all these, you just described like seven different jobs. Were you always looking for something else? Like, or was it like a runway?
No, it wasn't me looking for other opportunities. It was the organization kind of like, okay,
pushing you around.
Yeah, we have another opportunity. We need this done.
Yep.
We think you'd be good at it. Like, let's go and do that. And quite frankly, I think like, I honestly don't think my career would have been half of what it was if I hadn't worked for Imperial when I came out of school, because the development and growth and I used to pride myself in winging it. Like, I mean, look at my university, right? Like if I showed up, it's kind of like, if I didn't show up, I'll take the risk, right? Like this is kind of the way it worked. But the discipline, the process, the thoughtfulness, the strategy. I mean, I learned discipline like I never dreamt when I worked at Imperial. And if I hadn't learned that discipline and an ability to manage like many things at the same time that I learned in that organization, I would have never achieved the levels that I achieved in my career.
Was it ever on, when you're walking all these different situations, from the like offshore to Cold Lake, was it ever like, did self-doubt ever creep in? Like,
did I have imposter syndrome?
Or just like, what did it feel like walking into these unique situations with a lot at stake and doing a good job? Like, did you trust it? Did you know you had it? Were you just willing to like put in the work and do the research and figure it all out and then come up with an idea?
Yeah, most of the time I would say I was energized by the challenge.
Yeah.
Like I thought, oh, this will be fun. Like this sounds like a fantastic life experience. Although when we got transferred to New Orleans, it kind of freaked us out, because we started realizing like, whoa, the crime rate is through the roof and the issues there. So that one was kind of pause for second thought. But no, I was always really energized, and I basically went in and focused on trying to learn, like, how does this work, and who are the people, and how does it, how do we work together? And I felt like working with people and connecting actually was a huge advantage for me, because I loved working with people. And so often I would learn an enormous amount. And I always, every single time I went into a new job, I would double down and put in lots of hours, and because I needed to get up to speed so I could make a contribution. But I felt like I did that pretty quick, and the more excited I was, the more energized I was, the more I would invest and faster come up to speed. But as the decades go by, I start realizing like, okay, all these things start to interconnect, right? So now when I go into a job, it's kind of like, okay, well, here's a portion of it, but I already know a whole bunch of other contexts and stuff around it. So I love change. I'm probably ADD or something. I don't know, ADHD. But the thing is I saw that as a huge advantage. And so I took it on, and that helped my learning and such. And I felt like, I was good working with people, whether they were good times or bad times, because every organization has its challenges, and we're going to have good days and bad days. So,
you've touched on it multiple times, people. Has it been a common focus for you all the way through? Like just either connecting with people or listening to people, or just like, you said it enough where I'm like, is it a focus point? Like it's a driver? Yeah,
actually, not being in my role at Suncor, the biggest thing I miss is the people. By far. And I just get totally energized working with people, learning from people, seeing experiences and all that sort of thing. I mean, I'm a computer science guy with a business minor, and I've learned so much through my career, technically. And so I love sitting down and having the debates and learning and trying to figure out what's working and what's not. And then how can I as a leader make a contribution? But I think it was actually at that point when I started working in the industry very early on that I realized like, I literally have set myself up to not work with people. And it's kind of like, this is where I get my energy, right? Like I remember, I was trying to make money and put myself through university and all this kind of stuff. And So I remember literally going to Chi-Chi's and paying somebody to take their shift on a Friday night. I'd like, hey, listen, like, you know, you should probably go out partying. I'll take your shift. Here's $20. Like, have a good night. And then I would make a lot of money.
You're up a couple hundred.
I'd make a lot of money, and I would have so much fun.
Yeah.
And I'd feel like, hey, like I went to a party all night and got paid for it. It was fantastic. So that just energized me. And I realized like how I didn't think about this long before I graduated from university. I was kind of like, okay, wait a minute. Do I really want to be doing this? Like sitting in a room, staring at a computer screen.
Yeah.
It was the people that really energized me. And so that's been a pattern. And, you know, I've been super thankful to have jobs where I've worked with not just enormous numbers of people, but a very diverse group of people, whether it's the person driving the truck in the mine or whether it's somebody fixing a piece of equipment at 40 below welding, you know, steel plate, or whether it's the board in the boardroom. I've worked with like fantastic people and so many diverse skills and backgrounds and such. And you realize like without that, it doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
did you leave? What happened after Imperial? You leave? I don't know that what business buys what. So where does it connect from after Imperial?
So what ended up happening is a buddy of mine phoned me up and said, hey, we should have a coffee. And he was a kind of a CFO type guy, big financial backgrounds. And so I actually like, oh, okay, let's go have coffee. Well, I get there and find out, oh, he's a headhunter. And I was like, what? You're a headhunter? You got to be kidding me. Like, I didn't even know that when I went for the coffee.
Yep.
And he said, oh, Mark, the reason I was thinking about you is because like we're trying to hire for this job for Suncor, and it's the head of strategy and trading. And we're going all over the globe and looking at all this kind of stuff. And I think like, wait a minute, this guy's worked in the strategy group. He's run the trading group. He was a crude oil pricing man. And so I was giving him all my background stuff, and he said, man, we should throw your hat in the ring here. And that was through that process that I first met Rick George. And Rick is like spectacular. He was in my view, he's an iconic leader in our oil sands industry, like of all time, one of the top iconic leaders. And so it was just spectacular. And we got together. I remember Rick and I having my interview, and it was kind of like this. Like we sat down and we started talking, and like, you know, an hour later, Rick's going like, wait a minute, I got to go. Like, what in the world's going on here? And so it was really good. And I connected with Steve Williams through that. And so I really had a great engagement with the folks that were there. And so I ended up going over there, and then it was right at that time. So I think the very first real conversation I had as a Suncor employee with Rick George was, I said, hey, Rick, have you ever thought about merging with Petro-Canada? And he was like, what? He goes, and I didn't realize at the time when I said that, because he was asking, why are you saying that? It's kind of like, well, they seem to have lots of money, but not great opportunities. And we seem to have great opportunities and not a lot of money. Like, this seems like a match made in heaven. Like, let's go. And so literally I started on November 18th. And by the end of March or middle of March of the next year, we announced the merger of Petro-Canada and Suncor.
Crazy.
And that was spectacular. And so then I led the integration of the two companies. And I was the honest broker. I wasn't from either organization. So I did that with Harry Roberts and some of the folks. It was a spectacular experience.
And it was just the ability to pull it off, a team around you, a bunch of experiences, like timing, like
the merger itself. Like it wasn't about me. That's for sure. And in fact, so Rick was the guy that led the charge, and there was lots of other people involved. But there, you know, with people's travel and vacations and all sorts of stuff, I ended up being an integral part of that team as we tried to get the deal finalized and stuff. But Rick led the charge, and he was masterful at it. But what I didn't know is that Suncor and Petro-Canada literally a decade earlier had thought about merging, which I didn't know. And so Rick took all of the failed experience from that and put it all together, and we made this deal work. And quite frankly, I think that the Suncor that came out of that was substantially stronger than either Petro-Canada or Suncor. And so I think it was a godsend that those two organizations came together, because it's created a true Canadian champion.
What year was that?
That was 2008 when we started working on it. It was 2009 when it was announced, and it was merged in the middle of 2009. So yeah,
It's like,
so that was a big change. And so, and it set the company up to generate massive cash flow and have enormous opportunities. So it's been fantastic.
and that ride at Suncor, how long were you there for?
14 years.
And just,
It was like, I spent whatever it was, 4 months doing the trading strategy and trading. And then I went into the integration of the two companies. And then I went and ran the international and offshore business for about a year. Because we wanted to repatriate the office. They had an office in London, England. And so we wanted to repatriate it and get it into Calgary and bring the talent here to run the operation, because it kind of had a life of its own, and they were working on doing LNG in Russia and all sorts of things. So I did that for about a year, and then I went to oil sands, and we tried to bring the best of both organizations to oil sands, and oil sands improved dramatically. Cost, safety, the performance of the asset was way better. And you're seeing that as time goes on, it's just getting better and better. Like Syncrude becoming, Suncor taking a much higher interest in Syncrude, and then integrating that with the rest of the platform at Suncor has been a huge win. Syncrude just actually reported the best operation in the history of their company, with huge assets and such. And a lot of that is the integration with Suncor that's been able to make it all work. So yeah, it's been awesome.
14 years is a lot longer than that's a run.
Right.
Did you know it was going to turn into that? Like when you first, the headhunter sits you down and or did you think it was going to be a project that you would do your thing and move on?
No, I was hoping to finish my career with Suncor.
Gotcha.
Honestly, I never dreamt of leaving Imperial. I thought about it, but I basically concluded that, I had kind of missed my window. I loved working for the organization, but I was open to exploring new horizons for sure. But I didn't think I could make it work financially. So when I went to Suncor, I thought, I'm taking a lot of financial risk, but my wife and I both felt like, okay, we're going to be able to feed ourselves. We did, this isn't a big deal, so let's go do it. And it was a spectacular ride. It was spectacular. The first 2.5 years were it was unbelievable. And to create the company that we have today, I think is absolutely fantastic. And it wasn't the ending that I had hoped for or had written, but I loved working for the organization and Rick and the whole journey.
The transition out. I want to get to Joston, obviously. Yeah. But the transition out, you just kind of touched on it.
We can cover that quick.
Well, like that, right? Like when it's not your. I'll give you an example. Like when, like an athlete gets forced into retirement, right? So not on their they have ideas, they have aspirations, something. The cards just and then they got to figure it out. Yeah. That piece right there, does it obviously catch you off guard, or and then right beside that, do you know what you're going to do after?
Well, honestly, I never dreamt I'd leave Suncor when I did. Yeah. So, and it wasn't my decision. So the board made the decision. That's fine. So, and I actually always viewed that I served at the pleasure of the shareholders and the board. So intellectually, I've always known that I could go at any time. Yep. That's totally fine. And we had an activist in the stock, and Elliot, and they are pretty aggressive in the way that they work.
Yep.
And so that had the board on edge for sure. And we had a tough time, like, over my time with the organization. And a lot of these kind of happened in a variety of different timeframes, but there had been a number of fatalities, tragic, oh my goodness, tragic incidents. We had a bear come out of the woods and eat one of our female employees, kill her.
Crazy.
It was just, honestly, I don't know if I could think of a more tragic circumstance. And there was all sorts of people, like, physically right there trying to help.
Yeah.
Or an employee that is a master electrician climbing up onto a transformer and electrocuting himself.
Mm-hmm.
It's just unbelievable. You just wonder, how in the world does this happen?
Yep.
With all the processes and safety checks and everything else. And now we learn from it. We make changes. We implement new standards and those sorts of things. So, but we had a fatality on July 7th of 2022. And so the board dismissed me within basically 24 hours.
Yep.
And I thought I would be there for years. It's fine. I didn't have a plan because I thought I was going to be there for years.
Yep.
So, but hey, like, that's the board's prerogative. They can do whatever they want. And I'm not going to sit around and whine for it. I've lived one of the most blessed lives I could possibly live. I've loved the journey I've been on.
Yeah.
I've been so blessed to work with the people that I've worked with. And I've worked for some of the most spectacular leaders ever in the industry. And so I've had a fantastic ride. So I wasn't going to sit around and sit in the corner and whine about it.
Yep.
So I started thinking, like, okay, well, what am I going to do with my time? I feel like I have a lot of energy. I have lots of ideas. What's the path forward here? And so, just because of the way it played down, a lot of the things that I thought I would do in retirement, all those doors were closed. Yeah. And so, because now I was kind of persona non grata, so I thought, okay, well, like, hey, what's within my capabilities and stuff? And so, and that was kind of where we started with Joston. Amazing. Because Joston is to me, it's just such a missing in the energy system. Our energy system is the envy of the world. We have essentially infinite energy. We're an energy superpower as a country, and we have a relatively small population. So we have, like, almost infinite energy from the consumer's perspective, and it's safe and it's reliable. Yeah. I was kind of joking, like, we talk about for months a time where it might have been unreliable, right? Like in most places in the world, they're constantly talking about, when is a time when it will be reliable, right? Like, that's what's getting the attention. Yeah. So we freak out if we think that it might have been unreliable. And so it's so fantastic. But the thing that always amazed me, especially in this global time of people talking about energy and climate, is no one understands what they're buying. They don't understand how much energy they consume. They don't know where their money is and where it all goes and what their emissions are and how to optimize it. And you just think, in this world of energy and climate, how in the world can we have every consumer not understand their current situation? Because I've always been a deep believer that you can't optimize something you don't understand. So I'm like, how is this even possible? So by definition, we're wasting energy, we're increasing emissions, and we're wasting money. And so the first step in that was like, okay, how could we empower the consumer to actually seize control of this? And, the way I would say it from all the interviewing we did up front was, the general mindset of people is like, okay, I just need to keep sending money and I will get energy. And I have no idea. And I sit and maybe complain about the cost and I don't like it, but there's nothing I can do about it. And I'll never understand it. It's too complicated. And we're trying to move from there to be empowered. And yes, you're still going to end up spending a whole bunch of that money. Yep. But we think that consumers, if they understood it, would spend between 5 and 15% less on their energy. They would use 5 to 15% less energy, and they may reduce their emissions even by more than that. And that's the state we're trying to get to. And so we created Joston. The JO is for Joule, a unit of energy, and the TSON is for Dr. Watson and Sherlock Holmes. This is like energy meets facts and figures. Amazing. And so we've had a lot of fun with it. It's been a ton of fun. So it's not the big people interaction and such that I had before. But the beauty of it is that it's been super stimulating and we've had so much fun, and we get, if we go to work and decide, hey, we're going to build this feature, like, let's get this done. And we can all turn our attention and do it. So although we have a small team, we have about 10 people working in the company right now. They're super talented, very diverse. And so it's been fantastic.
It's been, as I listened to the story for the first time, knowing nothing about your background, it makes so much sense. Like Joston might not be the people part of it, but the tech piece and like like it's like click. Okay, that's all makes sense why you went this way. Yeah. Did you how long did it take you to kind of come up with a plan of whatever, like version 2.0 or whatever this new like how long did it take you to come up with this idea? And the reason I'm asking is because when I got, and listen, you and I are in different stratospheres. When I got fired from my last job, it's a shot at my ego. It's a shot at my security because I have payments and all these things, right? And for me, it was like, it happened at like 2:00 in the afternoon. And so that day from like 2 till I went to bed at like 10 or 11, it was on me, right? There was fear. There was all the questions. And when I woke up the next morning, I went for a bike ride around the reservoir at like 6 a.m. And halfway through my ride, I was like, fuck it, like shake this off and just like pick yourself up and move forward. So I had this window of like, you know what I mean? And so I'm wondering how long it took you to like spin up the idea to start this business, and like how long that process actually looked like.
Yeah. Well, the way it happened for me is I was on vacation and we were entertaining guests. So, so I got a phone call. It's like, hey, you no longer work here. It's like, okay, great. Let's go have a barbecue. And, and we had other guests showing up that evening. And so anyway, so we were engaged with that, and intellectually, this was fairly straightforward to me, but like you said, emotionally, it's kind of like, you gotta be joking. Like seriously, we're going to capitulate at the first opportunity we have. So anyway, and that's obviously my own perspective associated with it. But so I think the thing that I've been focused on is, and the other thing about it is, hey, like a lot of people are in a lot tougher situations. I'm kind of big, fat, and happy. Like I'm retirement age at Suncor. I've worked for 4 decades almost. And so the financial thing, I've never fussed ever. And so we've been so blessed that way. So this ended up being more of like an ego thing and kind of a shaming process, because this actually helps facilitate what they're doing in their little process with Elliot and all that kind of stuff. So the thing about it is I end up just being like in my own situation. And so the thought of Joston happened long before I ever left Suncor. Because, as an executive leading an oil sands company, talking to the politicians about energy and climate and this and that and all the different things going on, I'm just like, wow, this is crazy. Like the people that are making policy in the country literally can't even understand their own household. And yet they can do bold policy. It's kind of like, wait, and I would talk to people in all walks of life, and the number of people that actually understand energy and climate, what it means to them, is a fraction of 1%. Like actually some of the most impressive people I've seen in this space are in Canmore. They've built net zero homes. They're like all over it, and they have the capital to do things that the market wouldn't necessarily drive, but they're passionate about it. And so it's very interesting. So this is something that I always viewed as like, this is a huge missing, that how can you have people in Canada, 7% of after-tax household income going to buying direct energy, and nobody knows anything about it. They don't even know if they're getting more or less efficient. And it's kind of like, okay, I think that's pretty important in this whole conversation, right? And what's happening with emissions and whether they're optimizing their energy system. And quite frankly, if they're fussed about emissions or not, or if they're just trying to save money or not, to me, it's kind of, it's similar actions. So when I first loaded up my app, my Joston app with my stuff, I almost fell out of my chair. I said, oh my goodness, I'm spending that kind of money on my energy. This is crazy. I should be paying more attention, and I'm a big energy consumer. I'm not the average energy. I have gas lanterns on the front of my house. And I'm heating my garage, my driveway and all that kind of stuff. But, so I'm a big energy consumer, but I was like, wow, this is crazy. Like I should be doing way more. I have solar panels on my house, but I'm still consuming lots of energy. So I actually took some personal steps to try and understand and benchmark and figure this out. And so I cut my household energy consumption by 34% in the first year. Yeah. Now, I would be grossly misrepresenting if I set that as an expectation. We think people ongoing could cut their energy consumption by 5 to 15% a year, which is probably somewhere between $250 and $750 a year. That's kind of a normal expectation. But we found out that we also know a lot of other things that are going on. So we came up with some special functions for Alberta that could save even more.
Cool.
And so anyway, so that's kind of the journey that we're on is like, how do we help people move from kind of indifference and lack of understanding and disempowered to empowered so that they could become more efficient, save the money and put it in their jeans. And everybody, if they had a choice in buying direct energy and we're not talking about our app doesn't come and say, hey, turn the lights out. It's trying to help you understand, well, where's all this money going? And how could you, what are some of the ideas that you could do it? And people could say, well, my primary objective is to reduce emissions, or I'm just trying to become more efficient, or I want to reduce cost. I reduced my energy consumption so much that all of those were fantastic. My emissions, my money, and my energy efficiency improved. But we can think of all sorts of examples where it doesn't do that. And all too often people in the energy system, I view that they so want the business that they grossly overstate the situation. And so, there was a company not that long ago that was advertising, if you change your windows, you can cut your household energy consumption by 60%. I was like, that's ridiculous. Like, what are you talking about? That's a massive amount of energy. And you're not going to get it by changing the windows in your home. It's just not going to happen. And so we're trying to position ourselves to, one, get all the information about what energy you're consuming, and then analyze it and put analytical tools, including AI and stuff to it, to try and help you find opportunities that you don't see right now. Our first little bit of function that we're releasing in Alberta here, and we've just released, is kind of exciting, because what we're doing there is we mark to market your utility contract to the market offer every month. So this is not something normal people do, right? But we can get computers to do this. This is the point of the app. So if you're paying 12 cents a kilowatt hour and the offer's 9.5, we'll point out to you, because we know all your energy consumption. We can go, hey, like you could save $120 here a year if you just phone your utility and reset the price. So we think that's actually a pretty good piece of functionality.
That you might be underselling. That's like spectacular of what kind of value.
It's, like we've seen examples where on electricity, somebody could save $350 a year. And they just literally need to make a phone call in 10 minutes and it's done. And you put the $350 and you can go out for dinner or whatever. You can go to Model Milk and have apple pie.
Hell yeah.
So this isn't going to change somebody's life.
No.
But the thing about it is, we just think like, okay, but why is this? We're just trying to create transparency. I think the transparency of the utility contracts is relatively low. And we're trying to empower the consumer to take charge of this. And so do they have to phone the utility? No, they can keep overpaying. It's totally fine. But we've automated that. So this is a function that if we think right now, and we have a very limited set. We have basically 200 households.
Yep.
And this is for people on fixed price contracts. But that's a large part of the province, right? There's a lot of people on fixed price contracts.
Yep.
But from our limited sample size, we did a calculation that if everybody in the province had our app and used it, it would move over $100 million from utilities back to the consumers. So, and we're going to do it for free right now. So, so that's what we're doing. So these are types of things that we think, okay, the consumer should be interested, but nobody has enough time to pay attention. So we can pay attention on their behalf. So that's not our objective of reducing energy and becoming more efficient, but we have all the information. And so we decided this is a function that we think would be highly valuable, especially as we're coming into the Christmas season and the holiday season. So we thought, hey, perfect. Put some cash in their pockets.
The entrepreneurial journey now that you're on it, does it, you've had the extreme of like big business, like you played on that like giant, like that way over there. And now you're here doing your own thing with a team behind you. But like, the energy, like, does it fill you up? Does it energize you? Like, what does it feel like right now to be kicking this thing off from the ground level?
Well, it's been fun because you don't have to put up with all of the constraints that you do. Everybody has, whether they're reporting to a board or you're reporting to a leader in an organization, often everybody's trying to figure out, okay, so what's the agenda? And then how do I satisfy the folks? The beauty of this is we just go do whatever we want, right? So it's fun in that sense. And we have all the independence in the world to go and do whatever we think is best for the consumer and for our customer and all that kind of stuff. So that's been super fun. I've really enjoyed that. I miss the big engagement with people. I mean, but we're hoping that as we get penetration, we'll be able to influence large groups of people and help tell our story and get people on board. So this is great. And then early in 25, we'll be going into Ontario.
Cool.
And we have it set up. So in Alberta right now, if you're with Direct Energy or NMAX or EPCOR, which is about 75% of the home delivered energy comes through those three, you can actually link your Joston app and we pull all the data automatically and populate it and everything else. So, this is purpose-driven focus, right? We're trying to figure out, like, how do we actually make climate and energy real to the consumer and have them seize control of it and then improve and save money and get efficient and all these types of things. So many things in the energy system today, when we talk about the energy transition, is often moving from one energy form to another. A furnace to a heat pump, or, internal combustion engine to an EV, or putting solar panels on your roof and all these types of things. People are kind of disoriented because it's kind of like, okay, wait a minute, but what's a liter of gasoline to a kilowatt hour of a charge in a car? Like, so we're just trying to break it down and make it simple. And I'm energized by the fact that, well, okay, maybe I'm not working with thousands of people, like I was, but hopefully we can create a positive experience for tens of thousands, if not millions of people. Our objective is to get to 1 million households by the end of 29.
Which, perfect segue. With Joston, does your brain work and like create structured plans in 5 years, in 2029, X, in 10 years, X? Like, and is that how you operate? Like, when you're leading something, do you set like firm objectives and then work towards those? Or are you kind of like more organic with your growth?
Well, I think I was telling you, I mean, I learned my discipline at Imperial, so I definitely have some of that in me. But I'm a interactive person. So I think out loud, I engage with people, ideas come up and such. So I like the agility of this stage because we can kind of pursue all sorts of different avenues and such. But then I realized, like, okay, but we need to apply some discipline. We just can't chase all rabbits here. And so I would say it's kind of iterative. My natural response is more organic. Now, the people that have worked for me will never believe that. But it's more organic. And then I actually kind of like, okay, we focus on, okay, but what's our real plan? Like, what are we going to focus on? When are we going to enter this market? How are we going to enter the market? What's our way to get some visibility and start getting some traction? So,
Amazing.
So it's I would say it's a bit of both of those interacting, and I think that's actually where it works. And we're talking to people, and sometimes we'll have a conversation with people, and it'll open up a whole new horizon. And then other people that we thought, oh, this would be like a spectacular thing to work together. And they like, oh no, we're going to close all these doors. So it's, the fact that we can be agile. Yeah. Agile just means that, it's funny because I come from the big corporate, and then you sit and think about all this stuff on the tech side. But agile, I think, is just like adapting quickly to your failures and closed doors.
That's a good word.
So that you can move on to like something else that will work. But this is such a big topic that we think we're planning to apply it to small to medium sized businesses to empower them, because it's like, okay, they have all the same issues that you have in a household. The big companies have whole departments fussing this. So, but for everybody else, it's a bit of a chore.
Thanks for doing this.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And I don't know, you probably don't know this, but I don't do any research on guests.
Okay.
So the only thing I know is either they're an artist, entrepreneur, or athlete. And those are the only three things I check. And that's it. And then so to experience this firsthand, to have a little idea of what Joston is, and it's such a cool experience for me to hear the story.
Yeah.
Because there's so many different. I just pick up on so many different things, especially the people piece and the computer science thing. Obviously makes complete sense of why Joston. Because from the outside, before I knew this, I'm like, how does why an app? Why go down the tech road? And now it's just like click. Actually,
it's interesting because when I was coming out of university, I thought about going and doing my own company. And one of my classmates is working for me in Joston today. And he and I talked about doing some little tech startup and stuff back in the day. But, the risks seemed too high. The tech, some of it was probably a little ahead of its time. I remember I think it was 1989, trying to think, hey, we should come up with like a medical records thing and put all that. That was back in 1989. We probably would have failed because we were a little ahead of the curve, I think, on that particular one, and probably woefully unprepared for what we were about to take on. But no, it's been a ton of fun.
You imagine though, like that little pivot, like that decision coming out of university to start your own thing. Like it just, who knows?
Well, and the fact that I was working full time and going to university, I thought, working for a company that actually like gives you vacation and stuff, like this would help moderate me. And actually, I think it was mostly successful. I worked really hard to take my vacation and get a break, and when I was at work, stay energized and move forward. So,
I end the show with one question. When I say Calgary, where's your head go?
Well, it's interesting, Jeff, that I told you I grew up here and then moved away. And I remember, like, Calgary to me is when I came home, we would be driving to go see some family member or whatever. And this especially after we'd been in New Orleans, and we had been gone out of the city for many years. Yep. And we would be back from time to time, but you would crest over the hill in Glenmore, and you'd see the mountains and the snow, and we just think like, oh my goodness, this is almost like breathtaking how beautiful it is. And so to have traveled, and myself, I've traveled through Europe and Asia and Australia and the Middle East and Africa, and think like, wow, some of the most spectacular natural beauty is literally at our doorstep. Yeah. And so for me, it's the people really stood out as I moved around, because I think, wow, Calgary is such a friendly and engaging city, and just talking to people on the street or whatever it may be. And the second thing is just, wow, we live in a beautiful part of the world. And I'll tell you, from my perspective, it's kind of second to none. Yeah. And when I grew up here, I didn't appreciate that we had just such spectacular place. So, and it was breathtaking when you come back and you think, wow, I lived here my entire life and I've never felt this way. So when you talk about Calgary, I think of one, the people and the friendliness of it, and two, the mountains, when I went from Calgary to Toronto, I told you I was living in downtown Toronto and walking to work, and while my family was getting ready to come, and I remember just walking down the street and go, "Hey, how's it going?" and stuff, and seeing people's reaction. I thought, like, wow, this is a different place.
It's so funny you bring it up. I lived there for like 11 months in 2001.
Oh yeah.
I was working for Critical Mass, and 14 of us went out there to open an office.
Okay.
And I had the exact same experiences.
Really?
Like walking down the street, you can walk anywhere now, whether you're walking your dog or walking downtown, you can like lift your eyes up, stare at the person's eyes coming at you and say like morning.
Yeah.
Like something that basic.
Right.
And Toronto, I did not feel that. It was I felt the exact same thing.
Actually, after I was there a short period of time, I thought, oh, this is fun because the people kind of look away and all that kind of stuff. It was fun, but I actually worry that as we get bigger and bigger and bigger, that this is kind of maybe a natural way that people interact. I sure hope not, because you see that warmth during Stampede. It's so unique. And so I love so many great things, whether it's Spruce Meadows, the Shaw Charity Classic, the Flames, the Stampede. I mean, there's so much warmth in our city. And then we live in such a beautiful part of the world. It's spectacular. So we're very blessed to be here.
Agreed. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Really cool.
Yeah. Take care.